I'm Jake Aaron Villarreal, born and raised in Silicon Valley, and here to take you behind the scenes to share what it's like to be a startup founder, the journey they're on, the problems they face, the products they build, and an effort to transform industries. I'm excited to have with us today Mark Straub, co-founder and CEO of SmileID. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jake. Great to be here.
Well, excited to have you here. You're the first founder that's come on that we're going to talk about's penetrated the African market, which I think is really, really cool. A little bit more about Mark. Mark is the co-founder and CEO of SmileID. He has spent much of his career trying to help people in underserved markets access better opportunities through technology and entrepreneurship. Mark was a venture investor for a decade and worked with over 20 companies doing business in the ad tech, fintech, healthcare, and energy space or markets ranging from the US, China, India, and sub Saharan Africa. Working at Kozlo Impact, he led investments across Africa, including Kopo Kopo, Branch, Flutterwave, and Bridge International Academies. Love your background. Can't wait to dive into it. Before we do that, Mark, where are you joining us from today?
Yes, I'm actually at our offices in London. For anybody who's watching the podcast or can see it, I've got some folks here in one of our call booths. And yeah, excited to share more what it's like here.
When I started this podcast, I had this vision to go behind the scenes to share what it's like to be a startup founder in Silicon Valley, where I'm born and raised. And weekly, we dive deep in the trenches to find the wins, the losses, and the lessons learned, with the hopes that it helps you run a better startup. But here's the thing. If you've gotten any value out of these conversations or been inspired at all, hit the subscribe button. And I get it. Your podcast feed's probably overflowing. But to stay up to date with what's going on in Silicon Valley, stick with us. Because at the end of the day, we're all just trying to build something that matters. And we're better when we do it together. So hit that subscribe button and follow us wherever you find your podcasts. Now, let's get back to the show. Well, I like the flags, and if you are watching, it really, you really can't tell if you're in, the U.S. and a WeWork or internationally, which is great to know that you can really work anywhere. But you are really distributed. I mean, you've got people all over the world, don't you?
We do. Yeah. I think we've got something like, I don't know, 13 or 14 different nationalities working in 10 or 12 countries around the world. I think 8 different African nations, plus folks in North America, the UK. We actually recently hired somebody in Mauritius, which is a small island in the Indian Ocean. That's an African nation
Wow.
off the coast of the continent. So we are very distributed. The offices that I work out of right now are actually in an old train station in London. Um, and we've got a number of people who commute in here, so it's pretty convenient. And it's only a couple of stops from Heathrow, so lots of folks who fly in and out from different parts of Africa, we meet them here. Yeah.
Makes it convenient. Well, I love the fact that you are distributed, but you're actually American. What led you to the UK?
Yeah, so and it's like we said, there's going to be a very international theme here. So obviously, we're doing business across Africa. I'm currently living in London, but originally from the United States. And the company itself is U.S. incorporated, but we have subsidiaries in half dozen different African nations. So the long story short is I spent a lot of time traveling around Africa as an investor for a number of years, basically a decade ago when I was doing venture capital investing. And my home base was Silicon Valley. So I lived in San Francisco and in Oakland for a while. And then when I started the company, I was still traveling a fair bit, but was based in California. And I did that for 5 years with lots of waking up at 3 and 4 in the morning to do conference calls with customers. And, it worked because I traveled a lot. But then during COVID, it was kind of this really interesting challenge because we were growing a fair bit. We had a lot of demand. People wanted to do more things remotely and more things digitally, but I couldn't really travel much. And so I was sort of stuck at home in California servicing our customers, 8,000 miles away. When things finally settled down towards the end of COVID, my wife and I picked up and we moved our family to London to be on an easier time zone. And also there's, direct flights from London to nearly every African capital that really matters for us. So it's a convenient place from which to travel and spend time with customers or learn new markets. So that's why
Yeah,
I'm
that makes sense. Let's go back a little bit before we get into talking about your company, Smile ID. In terms of you, Where did you grow up, and what really drove you to really eventually get into venture and you really become a startup founder?
Yeah. I did not think I would ever be a founder. That was probably not something that I grew up thinking about. And maybe unlike most of the listeners who come from Silicon Valley, like I was not surrounded by entrepreneurship or those sorts of things growing up. I grew up actually just outside of Washington, D.C. So I was surrounded by sort of international news was local news. People, dignitaries visiting, big international topics being debated or discussed or voted on in Congress, those kinds of things. But startups and entrepreneurship was a pretty foreign thing. During the late 90s, my older brother actually decided to go out to California and work in technology investment banking. And he started flying me out to visit him. I guess under the real thing was we were going to go skiing, but through osmosis and spending time with him, I started getting really interested in what was happening in Silicon Valley, what was happening with technology, startups, the internet. And I was a teenager, but it started to be exciting. And I got the sense at some point that if you wanted to make change in the world, you're going to be able to do it much faster using technology than using, I guess, legislation or politics. So ultimately, I decided to follow him out to Silicon Valley, and I worked also in tech investment banking, and then eventually in venture capital, and that's kind of how I found my way to the Valley, but not where I started.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure there's some lessons you've learned on the venture side that can be applied to a startup, and we'll kind of ask some of those questions later in the show. But
And lots of
um,
stuff you have to unlearn too. Yeah,
I,
we'll get into
I'm
that.
assuming, yeah, I'm assuming, and I can't wait to hear that too. And we could share that with a lot of earlier stage startup founders that are trying to figure out how to raise capital and
Yeah,
what to say and how to get there and those kinds of things. But let's talk about Africa. It's what is it, 1.2 billion or over a billion people?
yeah, 1.45 billion, something along those lines. Another way to think about it, just to put this in your head, it's about 1.4 billion people, and there's 54 countries. So it's very, very diverse continent, very big continent. There's about 60 million new Africans born every 2 years. That's like adding a France every 2 years, something like that.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
incredible. Lots of growth there. What
It's a
was it that
very young continent.
very young lots of growth happening there. What was it that inspired you to say, "Hey, look, I'm an American. I could build a product and a company, but what did you see that you felt like was underserved there that you thought you could make a difference by launching a product and continuing to build, internationally over there?"
Yeah, I had a very unusual story that sort of goes from Silicon Valley to India and then to Africa, and sort of ends up with me starting a company. But the thread here is that, and you talked about this in my bio. So I worked for a fund that was focused on emerging markets, and we were investing in businesses that we thought could serve large consumer populations in India and sub-Saharan Africa in financial services. And I was personally interested in that because I've always been interested in economic development. I've been interested in helping people improve their quality of life, and not doing that through a charity approach, but doing it through a business and capitalism. That's always been more compelling to me. I guess I got to that point because after a couple of years of investment banking, I didn't find it particularly compelling, but I did understand the value of the skill set, like being analytical, being rigorous, being quantitative. Understanding the value of companies and the impact that companies can have around the world. And so that was always a more interesting means through which to make impact. But I was more interested in driving up or seeing what I could do to impact, incomes for a person than, I guess, stock prices on the Nasdaq. It just that was more compelling to me. Maybe especially growing up in Washington D.C. and reading a lot about international affairs. And so that was basically the way I ended up doing stuff in Africa was I was investing in these companies. I decided on my team I was going to carve out a thesis around what was going on in Africa. I'd spent a little time traveling just as a tourist. I went to the World Cup in South Africa. I had a fantastic time. I went to Mozambique on a trip. I went to Kenya on a kind of vacation. And each of these trips I had such a great time, had such a great experience. I kind of wanted to keep going back and seeing more places and learning more. And so I got hooked as a tourist. But then a couple of years later, because I'd started spending time, and most of the people I knew in Silicon Valley had not spent any time looking at these markets or never been, I started developing a thesis. And I also saw that, with the rise of Facebook and mobile payments and all these digital channels, that the next logical place that these things would go would be the frontier markets. And it was almost like having a time machine. If you could go back in time and investing things that would grow fast and would digitize countries, like you would do that. And to me, emerging markets were almost like being able to do that. And the real click for Africa was a number of the types of businesses that we wanted to invest in India. For one reason or another, they weren't possible in 2000 and call it like 2012, 2013, because the regulations wouldn't allow things like mobile payments for cash in, cash out. They didn't have the ability to do that because the central bank in India wouldn't allow it. But we could do those things in different markets in Africa, and particularly in Kenya and in Nigeria. And then fast forward a couple of years, the Indian government created, in conjunction with civil society, this new national ID system, which became known as Aadhaar. And once that system was in place, the bank allowed people to do these transactions, these cash in, cash out type transactions that previously they were afraid to allow because of fears of terrorism, fears of money laundering. So this piece of infrastructure allowed the regulators to loosen up and open up the economy. And you really saw India take off over the last 5-7 years. There's a lot of things going on there. It's a whole nother podcast we could talk about. But the kernel of kind of truth that was interesting for me was, once I saw the national ID system's impact on India and the speed with which digital channels and digital payments grew, I knew that that was a key piece of infrastructure. And if you could only have those kinds of digital ID systems in African markets, you could have potentially similar positive impacts. So that's kind of how I got interested in seeing if we could take some of the lessons from India and apply them in some of the markets where the companies we were working with in Africa were growing, but needed additional infrastructure, needed additional solutions like identity. So that's a long kind of windy road, a lot of airline tickets, a lot of airport lounges, but yeah, that's kind of how I got to where I am. It's been an interesting journey.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like a fun journey too. Africa, for those that have never been, is, really just a different world. In Africa, what are the markets that you're serving? So let's talk a little bit about Smile ID and
Mhm.
specifically what it does. And then who are the customers that are using your product that are seeing some benefit from it?
Yeah, we work a lot with financial institutions, and it started off 6-7 years ago with fintechs. So up and coming startups making payments or making loans available. We worked with companies like Flutterwave, companies like Paystack. These are payments platforms for merchants and consumers. But over the last 2-3 years, it's evolved to now more traditional financial institutions as well. It's working with banks or insurance companies, and even large platforms like ride sharing businesses, which we can talk about. What we do is we allow a business to onboard a user and verify the identity of that user. This is very similar to the process you might be familiar with if you've signed up for a digital bank account with like a Revolut or a Monzo or a Chime, or if you've signed up and had to verify your profile with like LinkedIn or Airbnb. So we provide that kind of a service. There's one big difference or one big twist for what we do. So most of those other services rely on documents, meaning the user is taking a photo of a document and maybe their face, and then they're onboarding onto that platform. We do that as well, but what we're really known for is being able to integrate into national ID databases and large corporate databases across Africa so that we can verify pieces of information against a digital source of truth. And this is faster, more reliable, and cheaper than using documents alone. And it requires less information from the user because all you really need to do is give us a selfie and typically an ID number. And with those pieces of information, we can check your identity against a source of truth. So we do that about 10 million times a month. And we do it primarily in Nigeria, South Africa, which you'll see the flag behind me today, Kenya, and Zambia are the largest markets. We also have traffic in another 15 countries. So we have users that are using the service in Cameroon and Rwanda and Sudan, even where there's currently a civil war taking place. So we're serving a lot of users in a lot of different countries, but the big ones are the ones that I mentioned at the front.
Got it. That's really cool. So, taking out the friction of the process, if you have a mobile phone, which most citizens of the world have today, you can take a picture and with that send it, and then you can onboard to like an Uber service or verify with the bank that you are who you are,
That's
and
right.
then be able
Yeah.
to do transactions.
Yeah, and it ranges from things that were, pretty universal, like a bank account, opening up a bank account, or in some cases remittances, being able to send money across countries. We also do driver onboarding for some of the platforms you mentioned, so for Uber and for Bolt in select countries. And then there's often use cases that involve reauthentication. So there's really kind of two sets of use cases. One is onboarding into that account, and the second is reauthenticating that you are who you say you are. And that might be important when you try to log into that digital bank account, but you do it through a new device, or you try to change the password, or you try to do a large cash out event. All of those events are potentially high risk transactions. And typically, the financial institution that we're working with would want to do some sort of second factor authentication on you before they approve that transaction. So, roughly half of the volume of transactions that we power today are onboarding events, and the other half are essentially reauthentication events.
Wow. Well, 1.4 billion people, that's a lot of people. How big is the market that you're going after?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about this. The numbers get really big, and it's kind of mind-boggling. I mean, we've done over 200 and I think 40 million verifications to date since starting the company, and we did about 120 million last year, just in the calendar year. So to put this in perspective, we did basically half of the volume we've ever done as a company. We did last year, and where the company's 8 years old. So you can kind of imagine the exponential volume curves. Now, to put that in perspective, 200 million people, 1.4 billion people on the continent, we're still like, we haven't gotten to, whatever, 8% yet of the whole continent, right? So we're still like, there's still a huge amount of people, of countries, of transactions that we're not yet powering, that, are still very much ahead of us and ahead of us in the journey. But we're at huge scale, and yet we're still like only really serving like less than 10% of the market. So I think that gives some perspective on where things are. And I think the other thing to keep in mind is that it's not, and we should probably talk about this in more detail, but it's alluring to talk about Africa as a market, like this one big continent of 1.4 billion people. And it's exciting. And certainly that's the story we love to talk about, because it's true. But in terms of the actual execution of getting things done day to day, it is different countries. And each of these markets is very different from each other. And serving banks in, Nigeria versus in Uganda versus in South Africa, quite different in terms of the personalities, the products, the integrations, the local use cases, and the regulations. And so it's there are large parts of the continent that we still haven't even really scratched the surface of, just because it is it is very different as you go from region to region. And so we're beginning, we've done a lot of work in three big markets. We've done some work in another sort of four or five. And yet there are still huge countries that we have only begun to explore, and that we know that there's a lot of work left to do.
Well, when we talked a few weeks back, one of the things you brought up, which I thought was interesting, was you kind of felt like it was in the 1970s when you were going to go into a new international market. Like you first have to go to the country and then figure out if there's an opportunity and then launch a product or a service and then figure out and learn what you can. But you really have to do that in every single country in Africa that you're penetrating. It's not one market strategy is going to work across the continent. It's almost like you have to have multiple marketing teams focus
Yeah, no,
on each
that's
country.
definitely been one of the hard kind of realizations we've learned that I think there's it's strange because you're doing both things at the same time. There are businesses that are Pan-African that do want to work across the continent, and they really just want to be able to plug into a set of APIs and just have it work. And so that is definitely what we're trying to do with the product. You know, like the I think there was a Facebook executive that I spent time talking to, and his family was originally from, I think they were from Uganda, and basically he was describing it as like, you wish that you could lay down a pane of glass or a circuit board across the continent and have everything plug in, but in reality it doesn't work that way. Each of these different countries is its own circuitry, its own kind of mainframe, and so you have to go in and understand and really, you know build relationships, build partnerships, build trust in order to be able to execute effectively. And I think in the early days of the company, that was me. I was going to countries and just spending a lot of time having coffees, meeting, going into a government ministry like 5 days in a row to sit down to wait to get a meeting with somebody. And then on the fifth day, you get the meeting and you talk for 30 minutes and you learn something and they teach you, you teach them something, they teach you something, and you just do that over and over again. But of course that's very hard to scale. So over time, what we've done internally is really build a team of people where there's a lot of people in the company who can kind of do that, who have empathy, who understand that there's nuance, who understand that localization matters. And then you start building systems internally so you can handle, the variety that you get. This API works this way, this VPN, if you want to integrate into this database, you need to use a VPN, and you're going to have to document it this way. So you start building the muscles inside the company such that you can handle the variety and the diversity, and that you have empathy for the variety and the diversity of each of these different markets. But that for the customers, you try to deliver an experience where it feels like it's just one set of APIs or one set of SDKs. And that is the ultimate tension in the business. It's like, hyper local from an operation standpoint, but international and Pan-African from a service standpoint. That is something I think when I started the company, I did not have a true appreciation for. But now, like, people ask me, like, what have you learned? They're like, Africa is not a country. And like, it's silly. Like, of course I knew that. Everyone knows that if you're sort of, if you're a sixth grader, but it's easy to say that. It's another thing to go live it and to spend the time like in the airports and in the office buildings and really understanding why and how these countries work, and sometimes why they don't, and then trying to build solutions that allow businesses both local and globally to do what they're trying to do, which is get on with their lives, get on with their businesses. So that's the journey that we've been on, and that I guess that's the education that I've had.
Yeah, really cool. If you look at now, you've been there for 8 years, sort of big picture, what is your vision as you see it for success in Africa?
There are so many fantastic entrepreneurs of all types, whether it's small businesses, restaurateurs, as well as the more, the tech savvy folks, entrepreneurs who are building technology businesses, technology scale businesses. And they have this tremendous ability to create impact in each of their different markets. The challenges often are that when you're building something, you have to, like, you can't rely on all these other enabling environment factors. So if you think about Amazon in the United States, Amazon can exist because you have drop shipping, you've got UPS, you've got these other sort of things that you can rely on. And then if you're building something, if you think about this, like you're a tinkerer, you're going to build machinery or hardware, like you can go pick up your pieces from Fry's Spring, you can order whatever you need off Amazon. Like you can put together what it is in a day or two with all the enabling things around you. I think about the markets we work in, and when something goes down, someone's got to get a part. That part might have to get shipped. from some other country that's got to go through customs. Now a server can get back up online so that a national ID system can function, so that a solar lantern company can do an ID check, so that somebody can get a piece of solar, a solar home loan. So like there's so much enabling environment that is very brittle and fragile. And so what happens is that a lot of the great entrepreneurs end up building their own stack sort of from scratch. And it's not terribly efficient, but you end up having to build this whole stack from scratch. And what I would my hope, and certainly part of the vision of our company, is that digital infrastructure like SmileID and like some other companies that are out there, some of the payments companies I mentioned, that digital infrastructure becomes increasingly available and reliable, and that physical infrastructure also gets to some level of par to meet it, and that you have a healthy enabling environment. Because I think once the enabling environment is there, you will see more exciting success stories from across the continent, both at the not just at the individual level, but like the country level, which is what we really want to see. And so, I get excited when we have a chance to sit down with the minister of technology or the minister of information or whatever from a particular country that is focused on building up their infrastructure. And we can share with them, hey, here's the insights, here's what we're learning, here's our annual fraud report. Do you want to read it? And sometimes we get audiences with them and we don't really ask much of just, hey, can we have your time? We'd like to share what we learned and we'd like to get your feedback. But when we have those meetings, and occasionally we meet very forward thinking folks in public policy or in public private partnership. And I think those people, particularly the ones who are, under the age of 50, the ones who are younger, have an enormous ability to impact positive change in the continent. And we want to be like part of that solution. So our vision is like you eventually have that really healthy enabling environment, not just physical infrastructure, but digital infrastructure too. And we want to be one of those key pieces.
Yeah. Well, that's great. You mentioned a couple of times the word empathy, which I, by the way, am a huge fan of, whether it's empathetic to the needs of your customers or your employees, or just in general, the people you deal with, understanding them a bit better. Being an entrepreneur is hard. Internationally, there's maybe some different challenges. For you, what have you learned about yourself and how to surround yourself with capable teams?
I think I have gotten way humbler in the last 8 years than I was when I started the company. And I I've started to appreciate the things that I'm good at and accept the things that I am not the best at, and then try to find people that can complement my skill set. And I think now, kind of going from being a raw startup to now more of a scale up, what I try to do is work with emerging managers in the company to help them see those things as well. Okay, here's the things I'm good at. What are the things I need to surround myself with? And to have humility about that. And I think early on, I assumed because I'd worked in very small deal teams, like in investment banking and venture, I kind of all assumed that like high performing people were all kind of like very similar. And now what I realize is when you're building teams, you can have people who are very, very talented, but actually quite different from a personality standpoint, from the way they work. And if you're not one of the FANG companies, like you have to be able to recruit people from wherever and then set them up for success as long as they've got good talent. So I think, for example, that I've realized like I'm pretty good at seeing patterns and synthesizing pieces of information, right? Like, okay, this thing happened in India. If it happened in Kenya, the following things could happen. These companies could grow faster. These markets would accelerate. GDP income per capita would go up. And I can see how those pieces can fit together. I also have increasingly an understanding of like I am not the most disciplined when it comes to organizing a sprint schedule, right? Or looking at the details for how a page should be laid out in a thoughtful design pattern or thoughtful design schematic for like wireframes for the portal or whatever it is, right? And so recognizing not just that like there are other people who are talented out there who can do that, but also that there are ways of putting teams together so that they work really efficiently to do that. And I've been able to rely on some really talented managers and executives who I've brought into the company who do that really well. And now increasingly, like where it used to be that I would stick myself into every single decision, all the time, like there's probably, 2/3 of the company that kind of just runs without me having to do anything. And yeah, I listen, I get the updates, I ask questions, but it's phenomenal to just like, I don't worry, about that at all. And I just know that every week it's getting better and I see the results. And so that's been awesome and very rewarding. But I feel like I've along the way to get there, I feel like I made kind of like every possible mistake I could. It's like I feel like I've earned this wisdom through a lot of trial and error.
Yeah. Well, you brought up a couple of good points. I mean, understanding the patterns of India to Africa, I think, just in general, studying patterns can help in all parts of the business, especially around people. Like, who are we hiring and why are we hiring and what's the pattern of success will look like because we hired that kind of person and, operationally patterns within the organization, what's working, what's not working. And I think the more you can assess your own experience with those patterns and be able to see the results, you can iterate and become a better operator of the company. But as a founder, you're really there's two levels you're operating in all the time, which, operating in the business and then operating and seeing the business for what it is and the vision and the strategy.
Hmm.
So in it and then on it,
Right.
operating in the business and working on the business and being able to have the right people allows you to operate, looking at how you can make the company better on the business. And it's such a relief too when you have the people in there in the trenches doing the work that you don't have to make every decision. It just frees up the ability to scale.
Well, and you
So
make better decisions when you have that mind space. That's the thing that you don't see when you're in the weeds every day, is you're making so many decisions that you're not giving yourself enough time to think. And if you did give yourself more time to think and more time to absorb information, you could actually make better decisions. You might make fewer of them. That is really hard when you are, the more complexity you introduce to your company. We certainly introduced plenty, right? We were doing business in a bunch of different African countries, trying to build products that combine computer vision with data, with structured and unstructured data. I was doing it, with a distributed team during COVID. So we probably bit off way more than we should have in terms of chewing for our size. I think the lesson that I have learned, and certainly I think the great managers in my company have learned, and I wish that everyone could learn, including all the people on my team, but just everybody out there who's building companies, is like, if you can't, there's a great concept that Amazon has called, they call it the bar raiser thing. And so every time that they bring on a new person to one of the teams, you have to try to objectively say, does this person on average objectively better than everybody else on the team that they're joining? So in essence, are they raising the bar? And when you when you have self-confidence and you're not worried about your ego, it's way easier to do that because you get excited about recruiting people and hiring people that you can say objectively, I think this person's better than me, and whatever, right? Some number of things. And it's very hard to get kind of junior people or early managers to get comfortable with that, but it's so important, because if you don't, there's this kind of regression to the mean, which is you end up hiring people who are slowly less and less good, because as you promote people, they think, well, I need to hire people who are more junior than me. And
right.
so you look at people who are not as good. And so of course, you end up with D players because the B players have hired C players and so on. But if you're able to really institutionalize that culture of like, no, 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 we want every new person to join to fundamentally impress us and ideally like blow us away. It's very hard to do that. It takes a long time. But if you're able to instill that culture, like you just build these superpower teams. And I've seen, I wouldn't say we're perfect at that, but I think we've gotten way better at it. And the results start speaking for themselves, like, as you see the talent density rise. Um,
Yeah, I agree with that. One of the things, and I know the Amazon framework as well, I think it's great. One of the things that we do is when we bring on new people, we go through the interview process, and it's pretty hard to get into our company. But I like to, at the very end, take some time to think and say, could I see myself working for that person?
yeah, that's
Like,
a
you've
great
done a
one.
great job. You can do the work that we need. The interview went really well, but It doesn't matter so much if I can sit in an airport for 4 hours and talk to you. I mean, that'd be great. But I just want to know, could you lead me?
Yes.
Could you actually solve a problem that I can't solve? Can you inspire me? And those are the things, those are those little things that I think are also important. But I agree with what you're saying. I think it's incredibly important to have the right people on the team and, put the ego aside. One of the things that I heard a story about a while back was, one of my mentors was telling about one of his mentors, which he was asking him about a problem to be solved. And it was a very big decision that had to be made. It was acquiring a company.
Hmm.
And at the end of it, his boss was going to make the decision to say yes or no. And so he noticed on his calendar, it said thinking, and it was thinking. And that's the only thing it said. It was like a 2 hour gap in his calendar. And it was the time he was supposed to really talk to him. And he's like, we need to talk about something that's really important, but I understand you've got this, you know, date with yourself saying thinking. And he goes, 100%. And he goes, well, why? He goes, because I make less decisions over the course of my day or month or week than most people in the company, but they're critical decisions.
Hmm.
So I need that time to think. And when I have that time to think and carve it out and everyone knows, I come out of there with much better decisions. So that was something that I think was great, and I tried it, and actually does really help. It's kind of funny when you see it on the calendar
Yeah.
and your employees are running, "What are you doing?" "I'm solving a problem, but I need some time."
It's so funny. Like I've gone into these modes where I have time and I have space, and so I do that, and I sort of develop that habit a little bit, and then something will suck me out of it. I'll get pulled into, oh, I need to replace this person on this team, or I've got to go, solve this particular problem in this country, and it's easy to revert back to bad habits. It's very hard to like maintain some of these things, but it's so true. There was there was something else I was going to say when you were talking earlier about this, this concept of bar raiser and the lead, like basically whether you could follow somebody, whether they would be a leader. I have found you'd think that people that you would want to lead, that you would want or to feel comfortable leading you, well, they're more experienced people, or the people who are more, confident, or you think that it's some of these characteristics, but actually I have found when I started asking myself those questions, looking at individual members of our team, that it's people who are like really thoughtful and they take time to check their work, and they're rigorous in terms of their thinking, and like it's it's not always that they make the right decision, but they make the decision right, to quote my CTO, meaning like they go through a thoughtful process to make decisions. And I found sometimes those are relatively young people on the team. And so when we've gone to some of them, we're like, we think you're doing a great job. We would like you, we want you to lead this team. Like sometimes they're surprised, they're not confident in themselves. And I think to myself, like, you know, it's not always the people who are quote unquote the most confident or the most senior who are actually the natural leaders that you really want to follow.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's the people who are they're maybe a little bit unsure of themselves socially, but they're actually their thinking is actually quite sound. And trying to find those people and then elevate them is actually really important. And it's I've seen this pattern now. I'm starting to get better at recognizing. My CTO is he's really good at this. He's been doing it for 20 years, so I've been learning a lot from him. But yeah, the people that you want to follow, sometimes they're not always the people who immediately grab the torch and want to take control of it.
Yeah, you gotta push them off the edge a little bit and say, "You can fly.
Yeah.
Now lead me, young man or woman."
Yeah. Yeah. Well, particularly young women. I've seen this. Yeah, I don't know, there is a difference in terms of the workplace, and I've seen a number of very talented young women that have really good thinking, really good rigorous analysis, good decision making, good judgment, but then don't always assume that they are cut out for management. And I think that's often just it's an assumption they're making based on some societal cues. But it's we have found consistently that we found a number of those folks and we promoted them, and they turned out to be very good.
Nice.
And so yeah, I mean, I obviously this is a bigger issue than sort of us or the company, but it's definitely something I've recognized, and at least in my little experience in the world, I suspect that this is a trend in other companies too.
Yeah, 100%. Well, let's switch gears a little bit here. You were in venture before you became a founder of a startup where you're having to deliver product into the market.
Yeah,
What were some of the things that you learned as, on the venture side that when you assessed startups or investing that you could share with the listeners that would be helpful? And then I'm going to ask you, what mistakes did you make when you became a founder that maybe you didn't listen to what you knew you should have been doing
yeah.
from the venture side?
My favorite one though, because you talked about shipping product, is like I remember being in a partner meeting and I was advocating for some company and some whatever that I was trying to support. And one of the partners, was like, "Who's on the board?" And I was like, "Well, I'm a board observer." And he goes, "Who's on the board that shipped product?" And I was like, "Oh, I guess you got me there."
Put my hand down.
Yeah, it was really, I mean, talk about, it was such a pointed way of basically saying, "Yeah, I don't actually respect your opinion on this
Right.
matter because you can't speak from experience." I took that to heart. There was a number of those experiences that I had where I don't think I don't think the partners who were saying that to me they weren't trying to personally attack me, but they were really making a point about like, do you actually know what you're doing, or are you just expressing an opinion, but you don't really have to hold the consequences of it? And yeah, I think the things that I learned that served me well were understanding an investment thesis, understanding what markets, and you know if you're going to build a company, you have to have some thesis around, is there a market there? How big is it? What it's going to take to serve that market. So being able to kind of hold together a business model in your head, all the different pieces of it, the tension between building product and customer acquisition and competition and differentiation, and like having an investment thesis, that was quite valuable, which to me now when I it's very easy to see when people who are starting off don't have that, because you start
Mm,
asking them to describe the different tensions of the business and they can't really keep it all in their head. And it's not always a skill that you have to learn in school. Like some entrepreneurs just do this naturally. They grew up, I don't know, lemonade stands. They just do it organically. But that's a skill that I definitely learned from venture. I think the other thing is understanding the business model of the venture capitalist. I think
mm,
a lot of entrepreneurs. There was this great quote I remember reading, like, founders get fired for one of two reasons. They either get fired because they can't execute, or they get fired because they don't understand the VC's business model.
mm.
So you could be doing something that is actually, making progress towards whatever goal you have, but you didn't understand the business model of the people you took money from, and so you're not aligned with them. And so I understand the VC's business model, which means I understand how, what has to be achieved from in terms of de-risking a business at seed versus at Series A versus at B, and like what are the different bets that venture capitalists are making. Those parts may served me well and allowed us to raise capital probably in times when other similar companies wouldn't have been able to, and that certainly gave us the oxygen to survive and explore and expand. I think the other part of your question was like, what do I wish I had, what did I know but I didn't actually
Right.
apply? It's funny, it's all the operational wisdom that I would hear other partners who had been founders or executives talk about, and I would parrot it. Like, oh, the team you build is the company you build, or, you know, like the best technology doesn't always win, like distribution, matters too, or whatever these kind of, truisms of venture capital that you read on all the blogs and podcasts. I would parrot these things, but then I get into the role, starting the company 6 months, a year, 2 years later, and you're in the chaos of making decisions day to day. And so you make a hiring decision because you feel like you need to, or you spend a lot of time noodling on an interface because you're interested in it, you think it's really important, then you realize like no one's using the product anyway, so it's really matter, like you don't have any distribution. So like it's easy in the fog of war to focus on whatever's in front of you and lose sight of these kind of pieces of wisdom. And what I found was the more that I would have at least some touch points with people who are outside the company, who are interacting with other founders and other entrepreneurs, it would remind me of those lessons more quickly than if I was sort of holed up all alone by myself or with my team working on something. So yeah, I learned those things in many ways the hard way, especially the team thing. We in the early days, I think I just fell in love with anybody who was also excited about what I was excited about. And so, I got hardworking people. I got people who were passionate, but I didn't always get the best people for the roles that I needed. And then that's expensive then when you need to then ultimately start making team changes. And so we had to go through several iterations of that. But yeah, that's the stuff. It's very hard. Yeah, I don't know. It's like it's very hard to give people advice. I feel like, at least for myself, I have to experience it.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
hard
Yeah.
headed that way.
Well, those are great lessons. And, with the evolution of AI and ChatGPT and Grok and number of other ones, like being able just to plug that information in now and be able to come out with, what is the business model of VC? And like, what are
Yeah.
the things I should be looking at? I think that AI in a lot of ways will be helping, founders, this new generation really accelerate how they're growing and success. And it'll be really interesting to see what happens
Yeah,
with.
there's so much. I mean, all the sort of wisdom is now available at your fingertips if you're willing to ask the questions. And now I think what gets more critical is like really understanding, human needs. Like, okay, so what is this next thing that humans are going to actually really want or need? Deciding what to build increasingly you know, gets gets to be important and tricky. Actually just building software is increasingly, I think, like even within a vertical, it just increasingly gets commoditized very quickly. So yeah, it's man, it's been a journey. I It's funny when I heard that Jensen Wang quote, like, they asked him, would you have done, like, going back, your college self, like, would you have started the company again? He said no.
I
Like,
read that.
man,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I've had a lot of those nights. Like,
We all
um,
have, no doubt. Well, that's really cool. I love your story. I love what you guys are building and the problem you're solving. Just a couple more questions here. For you as a leader, your company's evolved. You raised $30 million. You're
yeah.
penetrating markets internationally. A lot of exciting stuff happening. For you as a leader, how have you evolved since you started 8 years ago to where you're at today? What's one or two things that you can look at as a breakthrough that you feel others can learn from?
Hiring very capable lieutenants has made a huge difference in my sanity and then ultimately the success of the company. And we talked a little bit about that. People who are just like neurologically different than I am, and can solve different sets of problems and complement me. And I think what's been really good is when you find people who are like that. Meaning they're different from you, but they respect and understand your strengths, right? So there's a mutual respect and affection because you both respect and have affinity for the talents of the other person and how those talents can interplay together. That's been a tremendous learning and an area of positive development and success for us. I think that the other thing I've learned is that the further along I get into this journey, the more I realize that you have to take care of yourself and your own sanity as well. You cannot
Mm,
have a you cannot sprint through a marathon followed by another marathon followed by a triathlon. Like, you can't do that physically. You'll have a nervous breakdown. And so you have to find ways of gaining some control again over your health and your happiness and your sanity. And I think whether it's through meditation, through workouts. For me, it's like if I don't get like at least one or two really good workouts in during the week, like I start going crazy.
right.
And then you, of course, everything you make bad decisions, you don't do as much thinking, you don't do those things you really need to do. So just developing some of those habits has been really important. And I think for a lot of I guess for a lot of first time founders, you sort of throw yourself against the wall at the problem, and I'll just do whatever. I'll work until 3 a.m. and and that's not sustainable over the course. If you think any really valuable company, you kind of need to be prepared for like 5, 7, 9, 10, 12 years. Like you can't sprint for 12 years. So that's been an important reflection for me, and I'm think I'm way happier and able to continue to go because I've sort of found a cadence that works, that is more sustainable. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think the state of mind and the energy and being able to balance out your life, work, family, health is like so critical. I'm a huge proponent of Tony Robbins and a lot of like his like ability to change the state you're in because you have an event coming up that you got to really be, engaged on, or it's just a lot of little tools that are all on the psychological side
Hmm.
versus the physical. And I think it's something like 80% of business is psychological and 20% is mechanics, and we
Yeah.
forget about that
Yeah. I
you
mean,
know
yeah, I can certainly, and if you don't get the psychology part right, sort of the mechanics go out the window. There's a great, gosh, there was another entrepreneur who I got to know early on when I was starting the company because he and I were working off the same shared desks area. And he had this, man, I used to kick myself whenever something bad would happen. I would just torture myself with it. Oh my gosh, how am I going to come back from this? I'd be navel gazing for like an hour or two, and the whole day might just sort of be down because of some piece of technology didn't work. We couldn't get access to some API, whatever. And he had this great little technique, which was, it was, well, how is this the best thing that could have ever happened?
hmm.
And I'd be like, "What? What are you talking about?" No, no, like, okay, so this person quit, or like this product shipped and it didn't work, or this customer canceled, whatever. How's this the best thing? Like, think 6 months from now, when you look back, what thing were you able to do because this thing happened?
Right.
And it's the ultimate reframe. And I now try to apply that, and it's so useful. And in hindsight, there's been so many of those moments where I've had something that felt existential, and in hindsight, like, oh, like it freed me up to do this other thing instead. Or the best part is like, well, it's a good thing that that didn't work now because we can fix it now. But once it's at scale, it's like much worse. So like way better that that thing broke, when one customer was using it than when 300 customers are using it. So we've had a lot of moments like that, and it's been that's a tool that I bring out from time to time.
Yeah,
That
that reframing is great. I think it's very helpful. And one of the things that I learned, which has been a game changer, is there's a biometric change in your body, biophysic change when you actually move.
Mm,
So exercise is great and working out is great. Steve Jobs walked, and the ideas change, or you go to the shower and why do you have all these ideas when water's hitting you? Like there's a physical thing that happens and your mind can change, your state of mind can change. So whenever we're going through a problem we're trying to solve, or maybe something you thought was going to close, didn't close, whatever it happens to be. And I go for a hike, I live on a mountain here, and go for a hike or go for a run. It's like your mind changes, and
yeah.
it's a physical and a mental thing, and you come back with sometimes solutions or ideas, or just in general you look at it differently. And I think it's you can oftentimes be stuck in an office and you're trying to solve the problem you're working on. If you just get up and get out and walk around a little bit, oh, an idea pops in your head for some reason. It's a weird thing. It's good
One
to
of my
do.
favorite
And
things to do when I travel is the first morning, whenever I've landed in wherever I'm going, I get up and I go for a run, and I try to do it outside in the city that I'm in. It's not always easy. Some African cities can be pretty busy with traffic, but it gives me two things. One, it gives me that little bit of that chance to think, and I get sort of just a moment of kind of losing myself in this environment that I'm now in, and reminding myself like the people that are around the street, these are the customers, these are the people, what are the phones people are using, what's their day to day look like. That's the grounding reminder of like the market that I'm in, the customers that I'm serving, the why behind why we're building the company. And sometimes that, yeah, that helps me break out of like, what was my to-do list that I was supposed to do? What was the feature we were shipping on that thing? So I agree. I love that. I love running as a mental refresh, and particularly when I can do it. running around the cities in the countries where we're literally trying to make a difference. It's like a double reminder and refresher.
Yeah, really cool. Well, as you look at, we're into almost Q2 of 2025. What are you excited about with Smile ID? What's on the roadmap that is getting you going?
We've got an enormous amount of work that we've put into our authentication product. And so this is all around biometric authentication for re-authenticating high value transactions, high risk moments in user journey. And the really cool thing about this, and I know it's a little bit of a commercial, but we put out this fraud report at the end of the year, and we talked a lot about the kinds of trends we were seeing, particularly with the rise of AI and deep fakes and all of the attempts at account takeovers that we were seeing in the markets that we serve. And we did a lot of work on our computer vision team, building additional checks and additional security measures and leveraging AI that we were optimizing for our own unique use cases and the types of events that we were seeing. And we put that to work in a new version of what we call our smart selfie technology. It's a trademarked technology we built, and we use that liveness check in onboarding, but also in authentication. And we've just rolled that out at the beginning of the year, and we're starting to see adoption, and it's really powerful. And it's certified, it's ISO certified. Dynamic liveness technology basically forces the user to have to do something a little bit random each time, but still something that's easy for them to do on their phone. And that is, I think, going to be a game changer for us and for our clients who are trying to do more and more of their activities digitally, across channels, whether it's mobile, whether it's web, whether it's WhatsApp even. And so I'm really excited about that technology and that product. And I think it's going to open up more banking use cases for us, more transaction use cases, more payments use cases for us and our clients. And really, like, what we really want is we want to be able to allow anyone and any one of the end users in our markets to be as trusted as a global consumer, whether they're using a credit card, debit card, a mobile money wallet, cryptocurrency. We want them to be able to interact with the digital global economy and participate and not be blocked out. And it kind of goes back to, like, when I started the company, I had all these stories of entrepreneurs that I was working with who'd been, they were blocked. They couldn't buy Netflix because they had cards that were issued in Africa, and Netflix wouldn't accept them, or their IP addresses were in Nigeria and Netflix wouldn't accept them. I had my personal experience of having my airline tickets canceled because my credit card company thought I'd purchased them fraudulently because of where the address came from. We've had all these examples of where, bad guys get through the system, good guys get blocked, or good gals for that matter. And I think, like, the pieces of technology that we've been building and working on in combination with the clients that we're working with are fundamentally solving that problem. So that's what I'm excited about for 2025.
Yeah. Well, I love it. I can't wait to go visit Africa and hopefully use your technology as a consumer at some point.
If you like to
What,
run, you like the outdoors, go to South Africa, man. It's Cape Town, the Western Cape is spectacular. Great running, great.
do a little running, do a little
Yeah,
surfing.
yeah.
Yeah, very
Do some
cool. Well,
climbing. Go do Table Mountain.
there you go. Okay. Yep. Get the gear and make it happen. Well, I appreciate your time here. This is fascinating. I'm excited to hear how things go for you in the next 6, 12, 18 months. Have you back on, or we'll do some more discussion around where things are headed. But if anyone wants to find Smile ID or find you, where do they go?
Check out usesmileid.com, and you can find all of our products, our documentation, and actually our SDKs are actually open source. So if you're a developer, you can even test them out and play with them and start building something.
Really cool. All right. Well, there you have it. Mark, thanks so much for coming on and sharing your story. Really enjoyed it. And for the listeners for listening, thanks for joining us. It means a lot to me. You spent your time with us today. I'm your host, Jake here in Villarreal, signing off for now, but can't wait to catch up with you on the next episode. Until then, Mark, the world, take care. If you like what we're doing, don't forget to subscribe. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. And follow us on YouTube, where we go behind the scenes to learn what it takes to be a startup founder.